In this video I show you a fast mixing breakdown and which plugins I use on my kick, bass, drums, synthesizer, effect sounds and vocals. For my kick drum I start with a clean EQ and I cut some unwanted rumble and I boost the mid-range. Then I use the Pultec EQ to add some color. Here I boost at 60 Hz and I boost at 5K. And then I use a transient shaper to bring the kick drum really upfront in the mix. For my drums I start also with an EQ first to reduce some unwanted rumble. But here I also boost the mid information in the mid-range and I boost the side information for the higher frequencies. Then I use another color EQ, in this case by Sound Toys, just to boost the mid-range again and the high frequencies. And I use the harmonic saturation processor by Softtube to control the dynamics and to add a little bit of character. In this case I don't use another compressor. For the bass line I start with the FabFilter Pro Q4 and I cut some low frequencies and I cut a lot of side information to keep the bass really in the center, and I also boost some mid information. Then I use saturation. Here I use two bands, first warm tube for the lower frequencies and then warm tape for the higher frequencies. And I also use it in a dynamic mode. Then I use a compressor just to control the dynamic range and add some punch. And I use Sus2 and my kick drum as a sidechain trigger just to make some space for the kick drum. For my effects, I also start with an EQ first to cut some low end, and then I use the Hitswill EQ by Universal Audio to boost the mid-range and the treble. And at the end I use a compressor just to control the dynamic range and also to add some punch. For my synthesizer, I start with the track spacer, and here I use the bass line as a trigger. So I create some space between bass and synth that there are no masking frequencies. Then I use an EQ to cut some unwanted rumble and I boost the high frequencies with a dynamic EQ. Then I use the black box saturation from Plugin Alliance just to add a nice analog flavor. Here I like the triode tube. And at the end I use a compressor to control the dynamic range. In this case the Universal Audio Distressor. This is a great sounding compressor. For my vocals I also start with an EQ, and here I cut the low end and I attenuate some muddy frequencies. Then I use the 1176 by Universal Audio to catch the high amplitude peaks. Here I like the Dr. Pepper Centix. And at the end I use the LA2A also by Universal Audio just to smooth the vocal out. These are just the plugins I use on groups and main elements, but I also process individual channels if it is necessary.